Morning.
Okay. Hello, I'm Doug Bisset. Welcome to I'm pleased to present this segment on the Veterans Back to Class program on the founding fathers of the American Revolution and the war itself. I'll give you a little background on myself. I was a 23-year-old officer in the Army in 1970-71, and I served in Virginia as a military instructor, and then in Incheon, Korea as a port operations officer. After that, I majored in history in college before the military, and then with GI Bill from military service, I was able to go to graduate school, and then I served in civilian life and had a successful career in finance and from there, I am now retired. So I'm here to present the American Revolution, and back to our subject. Lots of research has been done on the American Revolution. It's difficult to present it all in a 30-minute segment, but we're here to do our best. Now, I've come to the museum on Merritt Island, the Veterans Museum, and you're in the Veterans Museum right now as we're filming it, and then we'll move into the library later. But I encourage you to come here and check it out. The Revolutionary War section is, well, we're going to sweep the camera and take a look at the rest of the museum after I finish my segment here. We're going to break this talk into three sections. The first section will be weapons and uniforms. And the second section is going to be the three key turning points, battles in the American Revolutionary War. And then the third section is going to be the key three founding fathers that I've picked to talk about: Washington, Lincoln, and Jefferson. So what is this outfit I'm wearing? It's a militia uniform. The one to my right is a Revolutionary War Continental Army uniform that was worn by the Army itself. But the majority of the fighters in the Revolutionary War were militia fighters, and they were essentially on call at much smaller periods of time, like they call them Minutemen. Like at Cocoa Beach High School, the motto is Minuteman, and what they did was they got called up for short periods of time to fight. But they had homes and family and farms to work in, and so they had to get home after the battle and take off. A good example of that was my ancestor, Lieutenant William Brown, who fought at the Battle of Bennington in a 3-day battle, and then he came back to his farm and worked it. So this is what militia did. All 13 colonies during the Revolutionary War provided militia, and the majority of the fighting was done by militia. The Continental Army grew from nothing, essentially, to what became a reasonable force, and in the end, we won the whole thing. Weapons varied considerably at the time. I am using this is a muzzle-loading long rifle. Hold this a second, if you would. And muzzle-loading meaning that you loaded it from the barrel side of it, and then you rammed the cartridge down this, and then from a powder horn, you poured the powder into the end of it. Now the problem became you could only get 1 or 2 shots off in a minute, generally speaking, and the best British soldiers could do 3 shots in a minute, so they were better trained. So what they did tactically is they also had bayonets. Bayonets would get fixed to the top. It doesn't work in this case, but in the rifle that's to the Continental soldier here, there's a fixed bayonet on the end of the weapon. The bayonets were used in a charge to spear the enemy, and they were very effective. From there were other weapons that they used, like really gruesome, but this is basically a hatchet or a tomahawk that was used. And in addition, they'd use pikes, and even like at the Battle of Bunker Hill in Boston. They ran out of powder, so their weapons didn't work, so they threw rocks at the British. But that's the kind of thing that happened during the Revolutionary War. So, get my notes back. What we'll do now is do a quick sweep of the museum. You can see that this museum covers all kinds of periods and wars and lots of memorabilia in here. So take a chance and come down here. It's on Merritt Island behind the mall, and I think you'll find it very interesting. Okay, here we are in the library, 5,000 military books on every subject you ever imagined. So if you need a book, you want to read some more, you should come in here and check it out. Probably take me the rest of my life to read all of this stuff. Topic 2, key battles that provided us with it saved our country from the British rule and led to the independence and freedom that we enjoy. There were 3 key battles. The first was the Battle of Trenton, New Jersey, in 1776 that took place right around Christmas. The Patriots under General Washington's army had been losing every major battle around the New York area for that year. It was very demoralizing. They were retreating down New Jersey, and they crossed the Delaware into Pennsylvania, and they really desperately needed a victory. So what they did was on Christmas Eve, Washington recrossed the Delaware, and there was an advanced post of Hessians that were British mercenaries that had been hired to help them fight the revolutionaries. And so in a nighttime attack, and then in the first morning of Christmas Day, they captured and killed the entire 1,000-man army of the Hessians at the Battle of Trenton. This is a great book by David McCulloch. It's a historical novel, but it's really a lot of fun to read, and it brings the whole thing into perspective. I strongly suggest that you read this. So this led to renewed spirit and hope for the American Army and the country. Also, the success proved to foreign countries that we were soliciting that we had hope that we might win the Revolutionary War. So the next battle was the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. So the British plan had been that year a 3-pronged attack up the Hudson River to Albany with one army from New York City and 2 other armies coming down from Canada, and they were going to meet in Albany, and they were going to split the colonies, the New England colonies from the southern states by doing this. And what happened was the 2-pronged attack coming down from Canada under General Burgoyne, the one that had come in from the western side under General Ledger got turned back part way, so he wasn't effective in joining the other 2 armies. And then General Howe, who was in New York, never made it up to Albany to help Burgoyne. Burgoyne moved south from Canada essentially down the lakes and the Hudson River, and met up at Saratoga with General Gates and General Arnold. And the Battle of Saratoga took place at that point. Now, since he had lost Ledger's army and Howe never showed up, and he lost a lot of his Indian allies on the way, the Indian allies were spooked by, interestingly enough, a lot of patriots used a lot of scary uniforms and stuff that scared the Indians who were spiritually having a problem and scared them away. So that was kind of a funny way of dissipating his army. Anyway, he was attacked by the colonials, by Gates and Arnold at the Battle of Saratoga, and they bagged his whole 7,000-man army. This was a huge turning point in the war, and it was significant to the American cause because it basically was critical in ultimately winning the war, and it brought the French into the war, which we needed desperately to help us to win it. So that was Saratoga. So the third and last significant battle was 4 years later at at Yorktown, Virginia, Battle of Yorktown, 1781. What had happened during the 4 years previously from Saratoga was there was a lot of smaller battles up and down the colonies. A lot of the British had moved into the southern states and were trying to get loyalists to get involved in fighting, and there were a lot of small battles. And if you saw the movie with Mel Gibson called The Patriot, you get a sense of what the fighting was like in South Carolina, for instance. There was a lot of vicious Civil War type small battles, and a lot of cruelty went on at that point. But anyway, from there, Cornwallis, who was in charge of the army for the British, moved his army slowly north up to Yorktown, Yorktown, Virginia, which is on the James River and right near Chesapeake Bay and into the Atlantic. Now he chose that site as a place to do his winter quartering because he could be supplied by the Royal Navy from the ocean side, and he also was within striking distance of General Clinton, who had 17,000 troops up in New York City, which was the headquarters of the whole British effort in the Americas. He expected that Yorktown would be a safe place for him, but what took place was just a miraculously effort on the part of General Washington and General Rochambeau of the French army, who circled around outside of New York quietly and carefully and marched down to Yorktown, met up with General Lafayette, who was a French general who had been scouting the army of Cornwallis, and the three of them surrounded Cornwallis. And then simultaneously there was a naval battle off in the Atlantic where the French Navy defeated a squadron coming out of New York to rescue Cornwallis. And once that took place, they could bottle up Cornwallis's army in Yorktown. And that's what this book is all about. It's an interesting story and study there, but the entire army of Cornwallis got bagged, 7,200 men, and that basically finished the effort by the British. So that ended the British enthusiasm to the war, and the continued struggle for them was really a worldwide war because they were fighting the French, and Spain had gotten into the effort. So their enthusiasm to continue fighting in the United States, America was basically gone, and so the treaty was signed in 1783, 2 years later. All these battlefields that I spoke of, these three battlefields, are national parks, and I went to two of them. I've been to Saratoga and Yorktown, and I highly recommend you go to Yorktown because there's a lot more to see there. These three victories forced the British, allowed America to become free and independent, and was an enormous loss to the British, both in wealth and prestige. And so on to my third segment. Who were the key figures that instigated and implemented the Revolutionary War? This was a great struggle with overwhelming odds, and this was their effort in forming a new nation, and they risked death as traitors, and so they're really amazing individuals. The three prominent ones that I want to speak of were Franklin, Jefferson, and of course Washington. George Washington, there's a book by Ron Chernow, which is a good book on a biography on Washington. George Washington, of course, the military effort was George Washington's. And without the military victories, of course, we'd still be subjects of Great Britain today. But he also became the first president of the new nation. And most significantly, people don't recognize that he would not allow himself to become dictator, even though some of the military were hoping that he would. And that was typical for the time. He did not, he deferred power to the people through the elected government. So that was a critical turning point at that juncture. The next one was Benjamin Franklin. There's a book called The First American on Benjamin Franklin. He was an elder statesman, and he was crucial as the primary overseas diplomat to bring France into the war. He had international prestige as a scientist and a sage, and he had rare diplomatic skills. So he could win the friends of the French to the Americans and form the Grand Alliance that brought France into the war and helped us to win the war. Later, he was instrumental in forging the government. He was one of the 54 signers of the Declaration of Independence. And he's also a well-known example as to why the Revolution was a civil war. He disowned his son William, who was the royal governor of New Jersey and a despised loyalist leader. My last example of great founding fathers was Thomas Jefferson. He was 33 years old, a Virginian, and recognized for his eloquence and persuasive argument. He was chosen by the Continental Congress Committee to draft a Declaration of Independence. That committee also included Franklin. And the Declaration of Independence was to justify the American stand against Great Britain before the world. So we were basically telling the world exactly what we were doing, why we were withdrawing and seeking our independence from Great Britain. The Declaration was persuasive, eloquent, unforgettable statement of causes that forced colonies to dissolve from the political bonds of Great Britain. The new standard was for a free society, guided by the principle that government rests upon the consent of the governed, provided significant personal rights the government must preserve, which is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which you've probably heard before. Jefferson went on to be Secretary of State under the George Washington administration and then to become the third president of the United States. Other significant individuals that added to the strength and effort of the Revolutionary War and were part of our founding fathers, unique government individuals, and our way of life. To name a few: John Adams, Robert Morris, Sam Adams, John Hancock, and Thomas Paine. We must recognize the enormous achievement of all these individuals, both militarily and in forming a new and lasting government that has stood the test of time up to today. We are blessed to be born and live in a country such as this great nation and the freedoms that we enjoy. Thank you for your time. I encourage you for further reading. As I've said, and this library is open all week long, I'll leave you with a quote from Winston Churchill, who was the Prime Minister during World War II and a significant historian. And he said, "A nation that forgets its past has no future." Thank you very much.